The whole situation with Kefas, we were never ever going to report it. We were going to tiptoe around this guy. Probably was going to linger years or for as long as it took for us to move to suburban schools. And so therefore eradicate this papa action. This like, you know, like, go yizo. Papa action. That's what that little monster was. He was papa action. After raping schoolgirls, taking them for granted. Le papa action yetu that we were dealing with at primary school was that Kefas dude. Megu papa action wetu. Yeah, I mean, fine. And kids were so scared that, let's call it, nobody, like, there was not, like, I don't even know why it took all that for this dude to be apprehended. It should have dawned on parents a lot earlier and the school a lot earlier that there is a terrorist around the school. But that's just the way that it is. I guess y'all. Papa action will just have her around and insist on taking a little girl that he wants there. And it's going to happen until he meets someone that is much too big for him to deal with. Much too big. So here it is that we are taking a long try, encircling all of Soweto just to get home. And then God raised up our nanny to be Zolaring and then catch us in the act of running away from Papa action. But for her, it's catching because she doesn't know that there is a Papa action in the room. What I'm trying to explain to you is that South Africa is kind of dying. It's perishing. It's like a little fishy outside of the ocean that is still alive, but it's on its way out. It's about to breathe its last because it's suffocating. It is asphyxiating. And it's gonna eventually die unless somebody scoops that fish and throws it back into the ocean. This country is kicking the last kicks of a dying horse because of its conglomerate of papa action outside of the schools of our girls. You cannot, in Africa, abandon black women and not have your whole freaking country just freaking die. This here is a black country. It's not like America. It's not like somewhere in Europe. Do you understand? Where it is that the majority is made up of white people, Caucasians, and everybody else is give or take here and there, you know, in small percentages, the minority. This is Africa. This is South Africa, to be exact. We are a black country, and all the other races are frankly outnumbered by the black community because we're in Africa. It's just the way that it is. Everybody that's not black in this country came in through a boat, a ship. Do you understand? Long ago, through colonialism, Jan van Riebeeck, or the Indians that came from India, that were enslaved in KwaZulu-Natal, came through ships. They came from India. The Chinese now, one day when they got all like curious about what's going on in this country, out here, lodged themselves here. White folk rocked up through colonialism and all that jazz. Yeah. And they found us. We were the majority. We were the natives. And we're still the majority. Anywhere where you go, in especially sub-Saharan Africa, Central and West Africa, and East Africa, you're gonna find a majority black country. When you go, of course, up north in Africa, then you're gonna be dealing with Arabs, right? But the lower part of Africa is largely black, and everybody else that's not black in Africa, in those regions of Africa, came from somewhere else. Even if they were born in South Africa, citizens, their ancestors are not from here. Okay, so it's basically populated largely, just in the same way that Europe is populated largely by white people in those countries. In Italy, it's largely white. In Rome, it's largely white. In Spain, it's largely white. Everybody that is in Spain that is not white did not originate from there. They traveled. Do you understand what I'm saying? They were taken there through whatever missions that ultimately got mixed other races into our countries. India is Indian, largely still. There are black people there. Yeah, there are white people. There are likely China, all different races. But if you are not Indian in India, chances are you come from somewhere else. Your ancestors go back to some other continent, similarly to with China or South Korea. There are black people. There are Indian people, coloreds, wada. They're just roaming the streets of that country. But if you are not Korean to the blood and to the T, you don't come from there, even if you were born there, even if all throughout your life you've only ever spoken Korean. Bottom line is your roots are somewhere else. They're from Africa, they're from wherever. If at all, you're not 100% Korean. So given that this is South Africa and it started out all like black 100%, those demographics will be largely maintained literally across the world. The demographics of, and the original demographics of a country will be maintained in that country all the way up until the end. All the way up until the end. There isn't enough time for us to so diversify across the earth that we would have a blend of races with equal measure, equal number across the continents. God has literally given the earth only 7,000 years to live. We're in year 6,000 now. Maybe in the millennial reign of Jesus Christ, we might see an earth diversification where you can't tell the difference between an African country, based on the demographics, and an African country versus a European country. Maybe the millennial reign of Christ will have that miraculous effect in so blending the human race that you won't be able to tell that this was once a black country. But in the run-up to the millennial reign, there's still going to be so much segregationist mindset in human beings that they will still keep breeding with each other largely. They will still continue to hang out with each other largely because the discriminations in the human race have caused fear of other people that are not like you due to historical discrimination, thanks to segregationist ideologies. So black people largely tend to stay with black people. Indian people largely tend to stay with Indian people. You get my point. And yes, thanks to diversification and all that jazz and coming together and the repealing of systematic oppression, we have started to intermingle. But it's going to be a long time. And frankly, we don't have all that time on earth. It's going to be a long time before, frankly, races are erased because of how much we've crossbreeded. Largely, we are still breeding with each other. We are still black women with black men, largely. Mixed race couples are in the minority. That's what I'm getting at. They are an exception to the norm, okay? Meaning, therefore, that black people in an African country will still continue to so proliferate the black race that no matter how many white people come to South Africa, they will never outnumber us. And no matter how many Indian people come to South Africa, they will never outnumber blacks. In the same way that black people will never outnumber Indian people in India. It's not coming. Not any minute now anyway. Maybe it's not impossible, but it's highly improbable. So in a country that has got a majority of black people in it, and the other people, the other races that are here are standoffish and aloof towards the black crazy, whatever it is that we as black people are doing to each other, when they are indifferent, just kind of standing back, watching our barbarism, in and of themselves, they are begging to get on a ship and go back to Europe. They are begging to get on a ship and go back to Asia, to India. They are begging to get on a ship and go back to Australia. They're begging because when the majority population of a country... My battery died on me while I was recording. Thank goodness I'm only recording videos that are only 3 minutes at a time. But anyway, whatever. I was speaking about how it is that when you've got a demographic, any single demographic that makes up the majority of a country, when people sit back and are complacent and are la-di-da concerning the defeatist general demeanor of that particular demographic, they're begging for a one-way ticket back to India if they're Indian. They're begging for a one-way ticket back to Europe if they're European, French, whatever, Italian, whatever might be that particular country's core thing. Now I'm all distracted. They're begging for a one-way ticket back to Australia, to Canada, back to Korea, back to China, back to Japan. They're begging to go back home. Everybody that is ignoring the crazy in the black community, you are begging to go back home. You might have been born here in South Africa, and so you're a citizen of this land. But the very crazy bottom line of the matter is this. Do you comprehend? South Africa is a black country, and it's going to stay a black country for a very long time. The reason, I don't know at which point I was cut off, because I was speaking for like 3 whole minutes, and it was quite a voluptuous amount of content that it disappeared in that little 3 minutes. I can be loquacious, but I did make mention of the fact that in order for the earth to be neutralized of races, we would have to crossbreed over so many millennia that now officially the races have been eliminated, or they are within the minority, that most people are now mixed type thing. And given our biases and our discriminations that dwell as richly as they do in our members, we are highly unlikely as a human race ever going to get to a point where collectively, all of us collectively, are content with the prospect of embracing that there is neither Jew nor Gentile, but all are one in Christ. That basically there's no black, white, pink, purple, red, or yellow, just human. There's no race but the human race. We are not going to get there on our own. As a concert, we might get there as 1 or 2 or 5 people, but there are people who are holding on to their discriminations so much that they will never ever literally see an earth that is raceless, like completely ignore color And given that that's a whole thing, people have therefore all throughout these ages been largely maintained in, there's not largely, huge percentages of the population still maintain within their own racial groups, meaning that all throughout the ages, pretty much since the beginning of time, we have been largely breeding with each other within each other's races. And so whatever might be the majority constitution racially of a country, it has been maintained because of human indiscretion, because of human discrimination, because of human classism and grouping and segmentation, and you get my point. Human beings are the ones that have refused to mix and diversify and have kept themselves largely within their races. In schools, you see it all over the show. Kids tend to make friends out of kids that look exactly like them. The black kids are with the black kids, the white kids are with the white kids, the Indian kids are with the Indian kids. It's just the way that it is, all right? And it's gonna be like that for a very long time to come, because the human heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. People are not about to exit that mindset any minute now, even if it is frankly just better to be that way. In heaven, all I want in Christ, there will be a diversification. There's not going to be a black community or a white neighborhood or anything of that nature, but on earth, those segregations will still continue. They will linger, and they will linger, and they will linger all the way up until Christ comes. It is potentially true that maybe in the millennial reign of Jesus Christ, it is possible for us as the human race to have countries that are equally apportioned of all races, where there's the same number of percentage of black people as there are of white people, of this and that, and whoever it is that is getting married just purely because they fell in love, and not because they and not having chosen a spouse precisely because it's a white guy as a white girl, and vice versa. Yeah, maybe the millennial reign of Jesus Christ might start to flatten that structure, that curve, but for now, until such time that we get to that place, we are going to be dealing with a hugely segregationist earth. So given that Africa will always remain largely black, sub-Saharan Africa in particular, Western Africa, Central Africa, and certain parts of Western and Eastern Africa are black, but Northern Africa, most of it is Arabic. Yeah, that's gonna stay a thing. That's gonna stay a thing all the way up until likely the second coming of the Lord Jesus Christ. So when you are living in a country that has a majority of black people, when you're living in a nation that has got a majority of black people in it, and you imagine that you're going to be some kind of good, some kind of cool, some kind of good, like basically good peoples, when you imagine that you can continue in that fashion in a country that has a majority of black people while ignoring black people, whoa. I'm sorry, I'm distracted. I'm eventually going to get back to you. I'm having to re-find my bearings concerning the last place where I left off. When you live in a nation like South Africa that is made up of a majority of black people, and it's going to be that way because we've been crossbreeding. We're not crossbreeding, sorry, but we've been breeding with each other largely, pretty much ever since. And then we got mixed with other races that came from other places, and they started to fill up the spaces where they were at. However, despite filling up the spaces where they were at, they will never ever procreate at a rate that exceeds that of black people. So there will always be more black people everywhere, even in KwaZulu-Natal, where there's a whole bunch of Indians, because that's where they first lodged when they were brought here as slaves from their India. Even though Babangata, in comparison, that's the thing, like Durban or KZN is called the Indian Central, not because it has a majority of Indians, but because it is the one province. KZN is the one province in South Africa that has the most Indians in it. The most Indians. But black people still outnumber them. It's Africa. Black people in KwaZulu, across whatever might be, take for instance, Western Cape and Eastern Cape, right? That's where a whole bunch of white people out here be preferring to stay. And it can be extremely racist in that joint. Despite it having a whole bunch of white folk in it, it still is majority black. Even though it is a white hub, if you want to call it that. It's still majority black, because this is Africa. This is Africa. The townships are cramped up like sardines with black people that far outnumber white folk who have got the power only because they have the money. They've got the power because they've got the wealth. Do you understand? They live in homes that are spacious, roomy. Their plots of land are vast. And then their next door neighbors also have vast plots of land. And so they populate the most gorgeous neighborhoods in Eastern Cape and in Western Cape. Do you understand what I'm saying? But if at all we were to look at the demographic constitution of the Western Cape, while white folk might have beautiful patches of land and large, roomy, spacious living quarters for one individual family, black people are clamped up like sardines in the Kasi, in the townships of Eastern and Western Cape. And there are way more of them per square kilometer than there ever can be white people per square kilometer in white suburbs. Precisely because this is a black country. It's a black country, and it's going to stay a black country pretty much until the second coming of the Lord Jesus Christ. So if at all, wealth is what's keeping people able to wield a weapon of power over the weak. All that it would take for the destruction of monolithic structures is for the majority of people that are afflicted by a grain to just simply make a decision that enough is enough. Otherwise, those who wield a wealth wand will always exercise some kind of coercive authority, being just one structure that is vastly outnumbered by the majority. That is the risk of complacency by all other racial groups in South Africa over the defeatism of black people. You're sitting back and doing nothing is literally going to send you back to Europe as white folk, to India as Indian people, to Korea as Koreans, to China as China. You get my point? Wherever you come from, you might have been born here, bred here, never been anywhere else, never left the country as an Indian guy or as a Chinese man. You might have lived your entire life and you're a South African citizen through and through. You are one of us. But bottom line is, this here country is about to become so crazy uninhabitable for everybody that those that can go back to their continents will indeed go back. They will literally make like a mass exodus and go back to Australia. They're like Trevor Noah's joke, I'm going to Australia. You thought that was a joke back then after Nelson Mandela got freed from prison. Wait till you see what under heaven is going to happen to all other demographics as a result of the defeatism of black people, because you literally cannot ignore the inefficiencies and the indiscretions against each other by a certain demographic of your country that is the majority demographic and not be destroyed as a country. So I literally am baffled at the complacency of white people over the crazy of blacks and Indians too. They have this mindset that we are what is the word that I'm looking for? That we're crazy. We are. They have this mindset that let them destroy themselves until they basically just wither away, until they basically just kind of disappear, because there's no talking to them. There's nothing here that can be done because they're stubborn. So what more can we do over here? Cool, beans and bananas, be complacent as much as you want, but bottom line is, when the black race is depleted to obscurity in this country because of black insanity, you all are also gonna go back to your black proper, the South Africa that you have grown to love, that you have farmed on, that you have built what do you call this, vast properties on, that you have harvested grapes from, this rooibos land of yours, this beautiful green land that you have made your own, adored, and called it a place called wonderment. You have called your homes, and you are not barging, even in the slightest. You're not going anywhere. This here, South Africa, is your bosom buddy land of the adored and the adoring. This is this land that has been adored by white men, Indian men, etc. Y'all are gonna go back to India. Do you understand? You are going to go back, not because anybody is kosharing you. Nah. You're South African citizens. South Africans are xenophobic, we understand, but they are xenophobic. That's just what they are. They can't stand people from foreign lands. But if you've been born and bred out here in these streets, they ain't gonna give you grief telling you go back to your country. Yeah, we fight Zimbabweans when they cross the border, but we don't fight white people for simply having been born here because they came from the Deutschland at some point through Jan van Riebeck. We don't. We are xenophobic, so ain't nobody here gonna be kicking anybody out that was born in South Africa. I was born in South Africa. These South Africans and their possessiveness over me is basically saying, look, it's not that we want to kick you out the country, it's just that we want to control everything that you do. Bottom line is, you're a South African citizen, and we will always stand for you fast and furious. However, we will always kick out Chidimma. What's that Miss South Africa lady that they gave a whole bunch of xenophobic shade? Yeah, we'll kick Chidimma out, girl. Marawena will always love you. But yeah, here it is that you're on this whole xenophobic spat against Chidimma, and then you treat Karabo, who's like from around here, these Tladi Soweto, like I've been mentioning right now. Yeah, you treat her like trash. Like, I mean, really, proper. They are the biggest and baddest hypocrites in the game. That's what I'm trying to explain about the South Africa of ours. It is just teeming at the folds with all of these insatiable hypocrites that will xenophobically kick a Nigerian to the curb any minute now, and then turn around and keep incubated in crazy obscurity their own. That's what's going on in the black community. They kick Chidinma to the curb, claiming that they are proudly South African, right? Proudly South African. Kicking Chidinma to the curb. Kicking Chidinma to the curb, claiming to be proudly South African, and then grab South African citizens pull out their hairs, pluck them out for different reasons than what it is that they pulled out the hairs of Chidinma, right? My hairs are being plucked out for jealousy. They're being plucked out for competition, for all consuming the same resources of the land to a point of violent competition, to a point of literally kicking a person out from corporate South Africa altogether. And gather dust. Human sacrifice rituals with family members killing each other. Do you understand what I'm saying? For nothing but jealousy and the acquisition of wealth, ill-gotten gain. But the reason why they kick non-South Africans to the curb is because they're just non-South African. So, I mean, when the black community does that to each other, when black people slap Chidinma out the way like that because she's Nigerian, and then they slap Karabo like that because she is too good at what she does, she's gifted, she's basically the person with whom in corporate South Africa I'm going to compete for a promotion, and Karabo's going to get it. So she gotta go. So on that day, basically what's going on here is that insofar as I'm black, they will find an excuse, these blacks, to get rid of my thing that I'm doing. They will find an excuse. Insofar as I am black people will find a reason for why I gotta freaking die, why I gotta go, why I gotta move, why I gotta be moved out the way, why I gotta be humiliated, handled, ransacked, brought low. They're gonna find a reason. With Chidinma, it was that she was half Nigerian, half, Namibian or whatnot, apparently not a South African citizen at all, even though she had South African, like, you get my point, all that racism, we get that she ultimately turned out to not be truly legitimate, but the way that it was handled, I frankly believe was quite xenophobic. But anyway, whatever, yeah, they found a reason to kick Chidinma to the curb that was linked to her extenuating circumstances. Well, I have extenuating circumstances, and it's that my family are not appropriately responding to my cause, and it's also that black people just saw it fit to compete with me. Men feel entitled to my body. Yeah, you will find a reason to treat a black person like trash. And when a country that has got a majority population of a particular demographic, and their demographic is literally barbaric, they're like baboons, they're swinging on a chandelier like Sia, they are incontinent, and those that are living in that country, sharing the same quarters as them, are standing back, literally waiting for black people to self-destruct. You're waiting for black people to reach entropy. You are waiting for black people to get to a point, oh Indians and oh whites and oh coloreds, everybody else, you are waiting for black people to implode. They are sufficiently irritating for you to at least admit that much in your own braais, in your own little corners where you're sitting. You are willing to admit that black people are frankly just out of this world crazy. They've lost their minds. But you are telling yourselves that let's just sit back and wait for them to self-destruct. Whoa. South Africa, like I said, this country is like a fish outside of the ocean that is about to breathe its last, but it's flapping. It's gonna die. It's that basic. Yeah, absent of somebody putting that fish back in the ocean. And the Lord is picking a controversy with the fact that there are others among us that are disinterested that the country should die, but it appears our hands are tied. And we also feel kind of stranded. And when everybody's out going back to Europe and India because South Africa self-imploded, it's self-destroyed. Yeah, these people don't have anywhere to go. You get my point? Like, are you catching the drift? Hey? Yeah, there are South Africans that don't have Europe to go back to, or Australia, or India, or South America somewhere, or even Antarctica. There are South Africans that cannot go back to even a desolate, isolated, uninhabited land like Antarctica because they've always just been in these streets. They were born here. Not only that, their ancestors were born here. Yo, they've been here all this time. They didn't rock up at Durban Beach as slaves and then made up the Charo conglomerate. No. These are Zulus and Pedis and Tswanas, Sarah Bartmans, that will always get treated like trash in Europe. So they're better off staying in South Africa. I'm one. Yeah. And yet South Africans are finding an excuse to make a spectacle out of me like Sarah Bartman, but right here in South Africa. Right here in your backyard. You will always find a reason to destroy oneself. But the naivety, do you understand, of Indians and everybody else, of white people and everybody else, basically the non-blacks of the country, the naivety to imagine that they can just stand back, sit around, gather intense dust, and wait for black people to self-destruct is astronomical. And the reason why I say that their naivety is astronomical is because, listen to this. Why under heaven is my makeup not applying? Their naivety is astronomical because, as it CapCut, I don't even understand what in the world it's giving right now. Sorry, I'm busy doing edits all at the same time. The naivety of everybody else is in that they think they can stand back and do nothing concerning a racial group that makes up the majority of the country, and there not be some kind of ultimate implosion or destruction of an ecosystem. All right. Before I got cut off, I think I believe I was speaking about how it is that if, for instance, you go to Cape Town, Western and Eastern Cape, if you go to the Cape, Western and Eastern Cape, it's got a whole bunch of white wealth, and it is the power there is concentrated in white people. Actually, that's still even in Johannesburg, etc. But there's a lot of white wealth and a lot of white influence in Western Cape, and it's basically the hub of white people. All right, they live in these big patches of land, these gargantuan properties, vast areas of lands that they own, and per family unit of just 4 or 5 people, they have got this like massive estate mansion, living in some of the most opulent and gorgeous neighborhoods in South Africa. But if then you go to the Gassies, the townships, black people are squeezed like sardines. The next door neighbor within the white neighborhoods is just, it could be almost not like a good, like almost a kilometer worth of a property. Okay, maybe a kilometer is a little bit of a stretch, perhaps but what I'm trying to explain is that there's a lot of space. What I am trying to explain is that there's a lot of space per individual, unique one white household, and their next door neighbor is separated from them by an acre worth of land that still remains. Do you understand? Whereas in the townships, they're packed together like sardines and shacks in houses that are kissing one another like sectional titles, etc. And there's like a lot more of them per individual, unique household than there ever can be in any one individual, unique white household. So, long story short, even in white regions of the country, there's still a majority of black people in those regions. Similarly too, with KwaZulu-Natal, with the Indians that rocked up here, KwaZulu is known as the Indian hub of South Africa, essentially, only because the majority of Indians are not the majority of Indians, but KwaZulu-Natal has got the largest concentration of Indians in that province than any other province in South Africa. But despite it having the largest concentration of Indians, because of the fact that that's where they landed, they landed at Durban Beach back in the day when they were brought here as slaves, and they stayed there largely and then proliferated themselves there, and then of course spread out to the rest of the provinces of the country. Despite them being the despite KwaZulu being the Indian hub of South Africa, it still does not mean that it is made up of majority Indians. You must understand, KZN is, just as with every province in this country, majority black. It is majority black. Western Cape, majority black. Eastern Cape, majority black. But it's got white power, white wealth, and white influence. Enough for them to vote for a party that a lot of people in this country call white DA. You get my point. They've got their own low-key set of rules there, but still the majority of that particular region, that province, is flat out putting it out there just black. This here, Roodepoort, where I stay, basically the western suburbs of Johannesburg, was in the days of apartheid largely a boer. It was made up of a whole bunch of boer men and women. Just the boerenmag used to stay, still to this day, a lot in Roodepoort, and it is still a boerenmag sort of kind of town, region, because even our streets have got very boer names like Hendrik Potgieter. The neighborhood that I live in is called Vilgehevel. Yeah, it's still boer type thing, but despite it being a historically boer group area, it's still majority black. Like the western region of of Johannesburg, this whole entire Roodepoort might have a whole chunk of boer men, like boer white people. But if you were to uniquely count individually on your 10 fingers and toes how many black people there are in comparison to the boerenmag, we outnumber them. Right next to Roodepoort is Soweto, which is also part of the western region of Gauteng, of Johannesburg. Soweto is called the southwestern townships because it's a go between the south of Johannesburg and the west of Johannesburg. And Soweto, the population there, far excels that of the south of Johannesburg, even in the days of apartheid, where only white people could live there. The population of Soweto always outnumbered Roodepoort and Winchester Hitch, Basonia, basically that whole suburbia. What I'm trying to explain is, even in the Group Areas Act season, remember there was the Group Areas Act time back in the day in apartheid, the population of white people in the white group areas was still negligible, literally negligible, in comparison to the voluminous numbers of black people in the townships, in the black group areas. What I'm trying to explain is that we make up the majority of this country, like it or not. We make up the majority. Where it is that there are Kasis, these Kasis are cramped up and they've got way more people than what can ever exist in suburbia. We make up the majority of the country. And so when then you go on a mission, embark on it to comprehensively ignore the needs of one half of the most populated demographic of your countries, you're begging to go back to Europe. Do you understand? You're begging. And the return to Europe or the return to India is not even being kicked out. You're not going to get kicked out because you're a South African citizen. That's what's good. You are going to gladly get on a ship and return, oh Jan van Riebeck, to the Deutschland. You're just going to go back. You're going to hook up a passport and you're going to hook up a, gently, like a work permit, a work visa. You're going to easily just, get on an airplane and move because of how uninhabitable your South Africa now is. A country that you came to love that you now gotta leave, but you have an option to leave because you're white, right? Tina, we go to Europe and we get kicked out, we get xenophobically treated there, we get ransacked, so we ain't got nowhere else to go. We don't have anywhere else to go. But when you sit and you do nothing, hoping that black people are going to implode, when they do, this country will end up a desolate wasteland. It is passing away. I don't know how many times I gotta say that. This country is dying a slow death, breathing its last, all right, flapping like a fishy outside of the ocean with nobody putting this little fish back inside the tank again. The defeatism of the black community is a thing. I will admit that. I will acknowledge it. I will admit and I will acknowledge it. Frankly, as a black person, I can't stand my own people because of what under heaven they've done to me and how I just keep on observing they're crazy. I cannot stomach the fact that as South Africans, as a black country, with now, thanks to post-apartheid recovery of black people, we've got a black government. Yeah, despite having a largely black government, go to black neighborhoods and look at what under heaven is going on over there. The load shedding epidemic is more poignant in the Gasi than it is anywhere else. The other day, we were driving up Dobsonville Road, that's what I shall call it, Kamo Bramfisherville and whatnot, ever since I could remember, like thoroughly and very properly. We've been staying in Roodepoort in the west of Johannesburg for over 2 decades now, okay? And traveling to my aunt's house in Dlamini, we needed to use that Dobsonville Road. From Roodepoort is the best route unless you use the N1, which is it's the shortest route, but then you can use the N1, right? When you drive to Dobsonville, be it during the day or the night, the chaos on the streets, it is just so cramped, one little long lane of a main road that is barely upkept. And then at night, it's even worse. It's pitch like night. It is pitch black. And if you look at the electricity like infrastructure there, the poles, the electricity, there's just so much electricity infrastructure that there is no excuse for why. There are no street lamps that hanga at night. And for 2 decades that I have lived in Roodepoort, that Dobsonville Road has had no street lamps. For 2 decades. So even before then, before I knew of that road, having to use it to connect to Soweto, like this, there've been no street lamps for 2 decades. 2 decades. And that was only from when I made an observation. I'm 40 now. We moved this side when I was around 23. So it's almost 2 decades. And it's been like that. And just recently we went that side again and it's still dark. However, the lights start getting erected when it becomes a white suburbia. When we get onto Main Reef Road and we start to drive into Florida, that's when there's electrical infrastructure. So black people are just left with every man for himself. That, you see, that is the thing that makes me just, I can't stand the black community. Like, the defeatism is ridiculous. Our black government, okay, so during apartheid group areas, whatnot, when black people were substandard citizens according to legislation, systematic oppression, essentially, they dragged their feet concerning infrastructure in black communities, basically non-white communities, in a cascading measure because Indians were considered better than blacks. It was white were the best, followed by Indian, and then colored, and then black. It was on that sliding scale, the way that they awarded resources of the country and benefits and comfort, right? That's how it was in the days of apartheid. So the Indian group areas looked better than the colored black areas, which also looked better than the black group areas. So basically, we got the bottom of the barrel scraps in the days of apartheid of any kind of infrastructural development or any social project that was done in the country. Black people got it lost. So black communities tended to have gravel roads all throughout apartheid. They tended to not have electricity poles until very late. I do remember a time when we didn't have electricity and we had to roll around with candles in these streets. We used coal stoves and all that jazz, right? So electrical infrastructure was not erected in Soweto for some time. And roads, building of tarred roads and everything happened only after apartheid ended. After 1994, that's when they started to build roads. It took even longer, but they started like over my Deep Kloof and whatnot, Pimville. Those parts of Soweto that were closer to the burbs were the ones to benefit first from the rolling out of projects of the government at the beginning. But basically what I'm trying to explain is that black areas in the days of apartheid, we got the scraps of anything at all, right? Anything at all. So of course our roads were gravel and our roads did not have sufficient markings to help us see properly at night, and our streets had no lamps. Our streets had no lamps, even though in, of course, white areas it was always well lit. Indian areas received next in line in the queue of infrastructural development, and then colored communities, and then the black. So we always just got the scraps, right? So there are portions of black areas that the apartheid regime didn't quite get to yet. They did invest in some of the black areas with things like electrical infrastructure. Like the electrical infrastructure of Soweto was erected in the days of apartheid. It was. We shall put that out there. So they did invest in electricity, but lost. Like we literally got the stuff lost. Do you understand? Because that's how they operated. Y'all can live with primer stoves. Y'all can live with, wait for us to finish making our places beautiful, then only we'll get to you. So they did eventually get to us with certain things, but even then it was always like scraps, that they gave us. So therefore, at the end of apartheid, certain portions of Soweto had not yet received the scraps. They were, I remember I told you guys that they tended to start Gobama, Deep Kloof, basically parts of Soweto that they imagined were worth the while for them to look at. That's why DK is so pretty. That's why Pimville is so pretty. In comparison to, like, for instance, Kozola, Soweto. Like, yeah, all Soweto is equal, but some Soweto is more equal than other Soweto. Like, y'all know that that's a thing. There are certain neighborhoods in Soweto that can give suburbia a run for their money. Like Deep Loop Phase 3. But then there are others that it's like, yo, what's going on? Y'all will know poverty. Like, yeah. Anyway, they made their decisions based on whatever they made their decisions concerning. The closer you are to the burbs, the more we're going to build your infrastructure, because we're sick and tired of looking at you guys from our skyscrapers and our high-rise buildings. So shoddy, all that cuckoo vibes. So they tended to invest in public infrastructure the closer to the burbs that you were. The more you went into deep Soweto, the more sort of kind of neglected you were. Okay, but nonetheless, that being a thing, Dobsonville is right next to Roodepoort. It's right next door, Florida. Basically a previously white area only type establishment thing. And you can see it. You can tell. You can see the demarcation line that is very apartheid from Main Reef Road entering into Dobsonville Road. What is the name of that street? Who cares? Okay, you can see. We are born. Like, yeah, it's like day and night. It's like you're in a completely different world altogether. Like just now it was raining and now it has stopped raining. You can totally see. There are no street lamps. They did not invest in electrical infrastructure on the roads. That was the apartheid regimen. It was systematic oppression. So no duh, they don't care for black people. So as soon as the Boer group area ended, they were like, Suga, Sizonbona 5 years later, we'll see you 10 years down the line. They didn't quite get around to 10 years down the line to build infrastructure in Dobsonville, therefore, and they left it at that, and they handed the reins over to the black government. That's why I can't stand you black people. I literally cannot stand you. I can't. I apologize, I cannot. Okay? They gave the reins over to Nelson Mandela and co. They gave the reins over to the new government, the black government. Do you understand? The black government was supposed to essentially recalibrate scales. They were supposed to do that which white folk refused to do for us. They didn't want to build proper roads. They did not want to build proper electrical infrastructure. They did not want to whatever, because apparently we were substandard individuals. They were supposed to essentially do a hard knock, intense refurbishment of Soweto. What do you call this? Baibizang. Retributive infrastructure role development is what was supposed to happen. The whole black economic empowerment law that came into effect after apartheid ended. was also on a sliding scale. The intention was to award black people opportunities that historically were not open for them, such that in corporates, positions opened that said that only black people, EE only candidate, employment equity only candidate can apply for this job, in order to make sure that the biases that dwell inside people are not going to continue to ruminate, course in the veins of their blood. And so therefore you will keep on hiring nothing but white folk into certain jobs. So they hooked up black economic empowerment to recalibrate the scales, to basically give opportunities to black people and say that this job only a black person. It's a diversity recruit, basically, right? It is a black only, or a colored only, or only black, colored, and Indian can apply for this job but not white, etc. That's what EE did, to try and retribute, to recalibrate scales, to try and to award equal opportunity, or the potential to recover comprehensively to certain other previously disadvantaged groups, to give them a shot. We are going to enforce a law that's going to ascertain that they get the jobs and not so much white folk. Certain jobs, of course, right? That was employment equity, the whole foundation of EE. Similarly to art, they have employed it then in the previously disadvantaged group areas. They were supposed to invest in electrical infrastructure, road infrastructure, basically the socio-economic landscape of the previously black group areas. They were supposed to build there. They were supposed to, seeing as there's this demarcating line between Roodepoort and Dobsonville that makes sure that when you start to drive into Dobsonville, there's no street lamps. The black government was supposed to, just like with EE, saying blacks only can apply for this job. They were supposed to say black only areas, we are going to, for the next 10 years or 5 years, invest in erecting street lamps. Because right now, white areas, we can afford to leave them. We can afford to leave them because the infrastructure is already so beautiful. It's already so strong. And their wear and tear is yet, it's not going to happen for 15 years. So we can completely ignore white areas. We can ignore Rosebank, ignore Vilkayevel. We can ignore, we can ignore, well, what it used to be called back then. We can ignore those areas for now. We can afford to. We can afford to just do basic maintenance. Make sure that the robots are working. Make sure that the paint on the floor is visible at night so that people don't, cross over lanes and get into accidents. We will maintain. But in terms of building, as in digging foundations and everything, priority should have been black areas. It should have been. On a sliding scale, I get we were mistreated on a sliding scale, in the sense that we were mistreated on a sliding scale, in the sense that it was first white, and then Indians were next, and then it was colors, and then blacks. So Indians were better treated than colors, who were better treated than blacks. That's how it was. So on a sliding scale, they were supposed to flip the sliding scale over and say priority projects are in black group areas, Soweto. Then we will focus on El Dorado Park. Then we will focus on Lenasia. And then last, Machila will go to Winchester Hills and Basonia. That's what they were supposed to do. Because that is retribution, true retribution, and put a timeline on it so as to not so frustrate white folk with a lack of infrastructural refurbishment that they will start to feel left out, and now a secondary type of apartheid is happening against them. So it was supposed to linger for maybe like 10 to 15 years, where we're going to be basically focusing on rebuilding infrastructure for the previously disadvantaged on a sliding scale, until such time that we can equalize this structure, flatten it, so that now the national resources for the rebuilding of the country, or the upkeeping of the country, will then be flatly allocated, because now we have overcome the inefficiencies that were caused by systematic oppression. That was supposed to happen. We are like, what, 30 years into the democracy, and Soweto is still dealing with the worst power cuts in all of Gauteng. And never mind, let me not say Gauteng because that's unfair. Basically, black neighborhoods, I say Soshanguva, Mamelodi, wherever it is that you might find black neighborhoods, they are still suffering from the worst case of load shedding. It is, for me, frankly, quite the travesty that there's any gravel roads at all left in Soweto, right? And then there's like the issue with street lamps, or the issue with erecting infrastructure, and then it just gets abandoned, the project, for like 5 months, 4 months, and then you are next, we are aqua futi. Why is there like a street lamp chilling for 5 months without it being finished? What's going on? Because that's what's actually going down in what I saw recently, go to Dobsonville. Hona lidi polu that have been put up. Mara, there's no building work happening on site. There's no construction, meaning that they just put the poles up, probably put wires in them, but they have not actually put lights there. They have not actually put the lights there. Yeah, because you see, public lighting is the responsibility of rates and taxes. It is the responsibility of taxpayers. It is not the responsibility of individual, unique people living in households. In your own household, you pay for your own electricity bill, your own water usage, etc. But the water usage of public infrastructure is from the taxpayer. So something is happening with the black government that refuses to part ways with taxpayer money that is going to build infrastructure while people are paying taxes. And so therefore projects get commenced in Soweto and then they just get abandoned for 4 months and then they go back to it, patch it up for like 2 weeks and then leave it alone for 2 years, etc. Wada fish paste. A black government is doing that. We're not still under de Klerk, y'all. We are not still under de Klerk. Der Blanche passed away in his racist spat. Like, we are not still dealing with a white supremacist regime. And our presidents, there's literally not been anything but a black president since apartheid was repealed. And yet, Godobsonville, all there is a half-done job with street lamps. And then what's worse is that go Old Botch, not far from where my aunt stays, because I would know this because my aunt's house is around that side. There used to be robots. It was a 4-way stop in the days of apartheid. It was not a 4-way stop, but in the days of apartheid, it was Chris Hani Baragwana, Old Botch. That road has been ever since the days of apartheid tarred, right? So they did invest in it because it was a jugular vein into Soweto. So yeah. So it always had robots. It always had infrastructure, even in the days of apartheid. So here it is that now we've hopped over into the new South Africa. And what does the black government do? My aunt lives just off Old Botch, okay? Kodlamini. And y'all, I've been going there. At some point I lived Kodlamini, the house of my aunt, okay? I have traveled, gone to school and back from that neighborhood. I remember what it used to be like. I remember better days. Y'all need to understand where I'm getting at, right? It used to be a robot, a 4-way robot, as in roboto at a crossroads. Roboto, cars going that way and that way in both directions. A robot. You stop, others go. They stop, you go. It was like that. Herein lies the black government of South Africa. Yo, like I can't, black people. Okay, I'm done, ne? But I can't go to Europe. So it looks like all that can happen now is for me to be raptured. Listen, I'm getting to a point here, ne? Our black government goes and grabs perfectly functional electrical infrastructure by the apartheid regime. All they need to do here is just maintain. The one portion of Soweto that they needed to maintain was Baragwana, Chris Hani Baragwana, Old Botch, basically. The Old Botch road just needed maintenance. They could have focused on the inroads of Soweto to build tarred roads there, right? But the Old Botch was already tar, with robots and everything. Here's our black government. Yes, guys, I can't, ne? I can't. Like, I probably cannot deal. Angwazu dealer, South Africa, man. Wi-Fi. The South African black government made a decision maybe 10 years after apartheid was repealed, or 12 years, right? Yeah, it was while I was still employed in corporate South Africa that this happened, and I just looked at it on some Ingi. The very intersection where my aunt goes home went from having robots to, listen to this, guys, laziness. They built a roundabout. They built a roundabout where cars have got to yield, watch each other from that, a 4-way roundabout where abantu coming down Old Botch, the busiest road in all of Soweto. Like I said, it's a jugular vein. But build a roundabout, go Old Botch. What the heck? Like, a roundabout is for inside a neighborhood, to slow vehicles down because there are kids playing with riding their bicycles and playing with soccer balls. That's where you build a roundabout, because a roundabout slows you down and makes you yield and make sure that a person undlula and yield type thing. 4-way stop are for inside, for inside neighborhoods. You don't put a 4-way stop on a main road like Hendrik Potgieter, a main road like Old Potchefstroom. Well, now it's called Chris Hani Baragwana that route, that long road. Go Soweto. But roundabout. When I first saw this roundabout, they removed robots and put this roundabout, causing, it is, like I said, a jugular vein, right, that connects Soweto to the south of Johannesburg, and it on-ramps onto the N1 highway that goes to the north of Johannesburg, which is the industrial hub of Johannesburg, industrial hub of South Africa, where a whole bunch of money is being made for the country. South Africa's most leading capital city is Johannesburg. Not South Africa's too, but Africa's most industrialized economy is South Africa, and Johannesburg is the wealthiest city in Africa. And the seat of all this wealth is in the north of Johannesburg, in Sandton, that whole region, right? Some opulent Lani joint. And this Old Botch road connects to the highway that goes to this industrial hub, that goes to Sandton, that goes to where most people go to work, either central Johannesburg, downtown Joburg, or all the way to the north, all the way to Sandton. Yeah, so a lot of people from Soweto are looking for opportunities to thrive. Basically, what would be the tenement of South African dream, if we were to use the terminology of the Americans, who call their grabbing of all of their dreams the American dream. Yeah, the South African dream. The South African dream is acquired in that central hub of industry that is the north of Johannesburg. So a lot of people living in Soweto work at Investec, at Nedbank, at basically all these not countries, what do you want to call this? These companies that have created their head offices in Sandton. They travel from Soweto, from Diepkloof, from Pretoria, not Pretoria again, from Protea. They travel from Mdeni, Pefeni, Sowetladi, Zola, wherever. And then they connect in Old Botch, and then they go on the highway, N1 South, N1 North, sorry. And they go to the hub, to Four Ways. They go there to Sandton to go and sebenza. Yeah. Basebenza Tiger Brands, basebenza Londuza. What you get my point. A lot of in the industry is centralized in Johannesburg, in the north of Joburg. There are companies, yes, that you're gonna find like Clover in Roodepoort here, and like Unilever, you find it in KZN, but really largely our industry is literally just concentrated in that Sandton region. And so most of the country, most of Gauteng out here be traveling across the periphery, the outliers of this province of ours. They travel into to go to work. They travel into Sandton, into the north of Joburg, coming from Pretoria, coming from Mamelodi, coming from Thokoza, Alex, wherever, coming from Soweto. They all just kind of like, constantly gather here to work. It's the work hub. It's the work hub. And the one jugular vein that leads to this work hub in Soweto is called Old Potchefstroom Road, or Chris Honey Road, or whatever. And they decided to remove robots on that jugular, okay? Put a roundabout and cause people to yield and go, yield, go, yield, go. Doesn't matter whether it's a Monday, a Tuesday, peak hour traffic, you're gonna yield, go, yield, go. So they basically caused citizens of Soweto that use this jugular, this connection route, to wake up an hour early, 2 hours early, and then in the days of load shedding, when it ramped up, then 3 hours early just to get to work at 8 a.m. in the morning. This Old Botch Road, it's just so crazy busy. It's so crazy jam-packed with traffic, literally with people being unable to move on both sides, that even on Saturday mornings, it's got traffic. Sunday afternoon, you will still endure some kind of bumper-to-bumper traffic on Old Botch. Like, there's no day ha gona tsatsi la mahala ko Old Botch because of the black government. I'm sorry, but no, I literally can't.